Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome to our Wash U Discover Portland wine tasting. My name is Jen Yokin, and this here is my husband, John. Not only are we Wash U parents of a current junior and an incoming freshman, we are also undergraduate alumni of the School of Arts and Sciences and the Olin Business School from the vintage year of 1993. We are also active volunteers, and I'm the Portland chair for APAP, the Alumni and Parent Admissions Program here in Portland. We're very excited to welcome alumni, parents, professors, faculty, and friends to tonight's wine tasting. Our audience is diverse, with participants viewing from 16 states. For all of you who joined us in the fall for the wine tastings, welcome back. We encourage you to participate throughout the event by asking questions or commenting in the chat. And we'd love to see your faces. So please, if you can, turn on those videos. However, also remember to keep yourself muted. It is now my pleasure to introduce alumnus Tom Monroe and his business partner, Kate Norris. We first had the opportunity to meet Tom and enjoy his fabulous wines at a plate and pitchfork dinner, an Oregon summer tradition that is an authentic farm-to-table experience, bringing together local chefs with local winemakers. Thomas Monroe is a co-founder and co-winemaker with Division Winemaking Company that he established in 2010 with his business partner, Kate Norris, in response to their personal interest in creating a unique, multifaceted community winery set in Portland's vibrant Division Clinton neighborhood. Tom grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and enjoyed his time in the Midwest watching Cardinals baseball games, helping his grandfather on their family farm, and working for various restaurateurs and bands in the region. In 2000, he completed his MBA at WashU, at the WashU Olin School of Business, with a focus on entrepreneurship and corporate finance. During the program, he wrote a business plan for an Oregon-based winery, which furthered his interest in the region's burgeoning wine scene. He was also an officer in the Olin Wine Club and an ardent proponent of seeking out new and less known wines from throughout the world. Division Winemaking Company creates nuanced wines that are driven by vineyard character or terroir, farmed for the health and sustainability of the earth, often using organic, biodynamic, and regenerative practices while minimizing intervention with modern adjuncts and manipulations in their winemaking techniques in the cellar. I'd like to extend a special congratulations to Tom and his wife, Andrea, on their new baby, Max, who arrived in January. And a special thank you to Andrea on the award-winning author. A special thank you to Andrea, who is the award-winning author, and she provided for the recipe that she provided for tonight's pairings. Please join me in welcoming back Tom and Kate.
Thanks so much, Jen and John. Welcome, everybody. Tom, you should unmute.
I just did it. Hello. How's everyone doing? Thank you guys for coming tonight and joining us for a second tasting for kind of a spring iteration of WashU tasting. You are catching Kate and myself at a very big moment in our an annual big moment where the season just started here. The growing season for the vineyards just started, and then as well as a big moment for us as we are in the process of moving out of our old winery and getting ready to start renovating and creating our new space, which we'll hope to have for very many years to come. I'm sure Kate can elaborate as well. The moving process is not the most fun, maybe the least fun thing we've ever had to do in the winemaking industry, but there is a bright future ahead.
Imagine moving your house, but then also moving 150 barrels of wine, 30 tanks of wine, your entire business. It all ends tomorrow, though. I'm exhausted, but it'll be worth it in the end. But before we get started, we wanted to make sure everybody's wines were open. I know you have 3 in your pack, and just with timing and with questions, we think maybe we'll get to 2 today. So we're gonna focus on the Gamay Rosé. And then the Cabernet Franc, the Granit. And we'll leave that Pinot if you want to drink it tonight, no problem. Ask questions if you want to. But it's also a great wine to hold on to. So don't feel you have to open that one this evening also.
Indeed. Indeed. All right. Well, if everybody's gets ready with their wines, I thought maybe, you know, I'm in a different setting than I usually do the tastings, and so I thought maybe I'd walk out and just show everybody one of Kate and my vineyards. And
so maybe you guys should do a little bit of background. So for anyone that hadn't joined us in the fall, Tom and I make wine in Portland, Oregon, and we learned how to make wine in France. My family is mostly based in France, in a region called the Loire Volcanique. And we did our studies there, and in another region called the Beaujolais, and in a region just north of that called Burgundy. That's the most famous of the three. We fell in love with Oregon wine and also with the climate that's here in Oregon. So not only the way that things grow, it rains, everything's green, it's perfect for grape varieties all over this state, but also the climate of Portland. Portland's a pretty rad city to live in. People love their food and drink here and their bicycles. And we wanted to really start our business
outdoor guidance from the social distance.
Hey, Gene, do you mind muting?
We have to be really clear, you know, that people will read that.
Anyhow, so Tom and I moved to Portland in 2010. And we didn't think we were going to make wine that first year, but of course, you know, we did. And we started making just a few hundred cases, 325 cases that first vintage. And fast forward to 2020, we're now making almost 8,000 cases of wine in our little winery in Portland, which is why we just got a bigger winery. Thank goodness, we were bursting at the seams. And we make wine from all over the Pacific Northwest. So we lease over 25 different vineyards. And the leasing is great. You know, we put a lot of our capital into building out our wineries. We have these amazing farmer partners that want to grow grapes and to work with us and to talk about the styles of wines that we're interested in. And Tom is at one of those vineyards right now. And this is actually one of the vineyards that we lease the entirety of. So we get to play with all the grapes that are grown here and to decide on its future. We got to do some new planting. So Tom, take it away if you're in the vines.
All right. Well, hey, first, Greg, the wines we're opening tonight, I just saw your question, are the Gamay Rosé and the Cabernet Franc Granit. And I believe that everybody also, as Kate mentioned, has the Pinot Noir as well, which is from one of our vineyards here in the Willamette. Okay, so it's not often when you get, in fact, I've never been able to do a Zoom from the vineyard. So this is a unique situation for us. So I'm standing at the edge of the Casson vineyard. And as Kate mentioned, this is a vineyard that we now lease the entirety of, and which has been something that has been a big goal for us for many, many years, mostly because it allows us to have complete decision making on the farming. And so this spring, well, last winter and this spring, Kate and myself have been interviewing partners to work with to help us with the farming of this site, and really try to get most of our ideas and principles and the goals that we have for the vineyard hopefully transpire into this year and the years to come's growing season. So what you're looking at right here is the Pinot Noir block of the Casson vineyard, and if you look kind of like over the little crest of the knob there, he goes down in a little bit more Pinot Noir, and then to the right is Chardonnay, and then to the left over kind of there beyond those old Oregon oak trees is Kate and my new block of Gamay. And anybody knows just a little bit about us knows that we're kind of Gamay fanatics. So we're very excited about our new block over there because it's going to feature some new clonal and genetic material of Gamay that has not been planted in Oregon before. So diversity is of the plant material and the different grape varieties is really what allows us to, as Kay was saying, play with different grapes and different varieties and make more complex wines. And it's just, truly just what's interesting to us. So this
Well, I
is really
think,
like, oh, sorry.
it's fine. I think that's maybe a great segue into the Gamay, or maybe into
Yeah.
the fact that maybe people mostly know Oregon for Pinot Noir because it is our most widely planted grape. And that's something that we, of course, love. I mean, delicious Pinot can't be beat, really. But Oregon's history is just about 60 years old when it comes to grape farming, especially in the Willamette Valley. And about 60 years ago, there were a bunch of pioneers that decided to plant the first grapevines on hills that had never had vines on them before, and to try out something that I bet you a bunch of people thought they were absolutely insane to try. What's really cool about Tom and my opportunity to work in Oregon right now is we still have a connection to those original people that planted those grapes. And to those original pioneers. And the sky's the limit in terms of what you can plant in Oregon. As I was saying, the climate here is so incredible. And while Pinot does really, really well, there's other grape varieties that have been planted in the past and are also being planted now that will start to turn up more at your local wine shops that you'll see coming out of Oregon. And for someone that likes to drink a bunch of different kinds of wines, that's the best.
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say, Tom? Do you want to talk about the rosé, or I totally cut you
Well,
off?
yeah, let's talk rosé. And I was going to mention spring, and rosé is the perfect pairing for spring. As you can see, hopefully in the little bit of video of the vineyard, we are at the very beginning of the spring cycle for us. So the little buds are just starting to grow. They're only about an inch or so tall right now, and we will begin in the process of what's called shoot thinning. And this is just making sure that the best, strongest looking shoots are the ones that are kept for the growing season, so that we hopefully get the best possible grapes for the year. Gamay is one of our favorite grapes, and Kate and I have worked tirelessly to promote Gamay from Oregon across the United States and abroad. And we, I think, have seen the payoff of those efforts, especially in the last 4 to 5 years, where Gamay has become a much more, I guess, interest point for Oregon winemaking. And we, if you kind of follow the wine industry, you usually kind of see things like people like us want to push first, and then maybe a wine sommelier or a retail group or somebody like that, they pick up on it, and then hopefully our consumers, connect with it then too. And we're getting asked more and more for Gamay. And so we thought that would make a really good sense to have our favorite spring Gamay as a part of this tasting, which is rosé wine. And so this is, the process of taking a red grape and getting it quickly off the skins before it picks up a lot of the color pigmentation.
I think we could go back a little bit. I think that talking about rosé, it sort of meshes two things that were maybe not well loved about 10 to 15 years ago in wine. When we moved back from France, Gamay had sort of been associated with Beaujolais Nouveau. And if anybody has tried one of those, they're like a fun and a little bit cheap and cheerful style of wine. And so Gamay had been considered a little bit lowbrow for a while, even though there were these really, really famous Gamay vineyards that people have sort of forgotten about. And then, so you combine Gamay as the grape with rosé, which when we moved here 15 years ago, also, I think that 90% of the people that I tried to sell rosé to would ask me if it was sweet. And I think that white Zinfandel really ruined it for a lot of people in the US for a long time there. I don't have a problem with sweetness in my wines. I actually do like residual sugar in some wines too, but it's been really, really fun to see this sort of crest of people learning about Gamay and loving Gamay, and then becoming super obsessed with rosé in the United States. I think that rosé sales over the past 5 years before the pandemic jumped 1,000% in the United States, which is absolutely incredible. Well, I'm a huge rosé fan. I think you can drink it all times of year. It's really good with turkey at Thanksgiving too. But this rosé is super special. And Tom was saying it's, it's made, you make it by getting it off the skins really quickly, and you can actually make it two different styles. One is by starting to make a red wine first and then drawing some juice off early, so that maceration doesn't happen and it doesn't become intensely dark and red and have structure. Or you can make it as a white wine, where you actually just press the juice off really quickly and you let it run over the skins for just an hour or two, and then you ferment it away from its skins completely. And Tom and I personally like the second style of rosé making. The first style is called a saignée, which is it means to bleed in French. So you're bleeding juice off early. And then the second way is called direct press. So back to you, Tom, after I interjected.
So I agree that rosé, somebody I just saw on the chat stream said rosé all day and that they love rosé. So thank you. We do too. I do agree that rosé is great all times of the year. I think why I think about rosé moment right now is because rosé happens to be one of the first wines, if not the first big wine that we release each year, and it kind of corresponds with spring, and it just, I guess maybe with all the flowers up and the new season starting, it just it always feels like this is where rosé's starting point for the year is. And this particular rosé made from Gamay is grown on one of our vineyard sites where we also lease the entire site, and that's in the Columbia Valley. So by the Crow, from where I'm sitting, about almost 200 miles, about 150 to 200 miles to the north and east in Washington. And we farm this site entirely to make rosé. And the reason we really like this site for rosé is it has really calcium-rich soils from the lime and silica that has deposited from the Missoula floods. So that gives the wines a very distinct kind of mineral characteristic. And we have just had really fantastic results with kind of turning it into more like a white wine. That's like the direct press method is treating a red grape and making it like a white wine.
So we press off the juice early. We do it in stainless steel with indigenous yeast. So we use just the yeasts that are in our winery and that are on the vines in the vineyard. We don't add packaged yeast or commercial yeast to this at all. And we allow it to ferment relatively slowly and at a relatively cold temperature in order to allow for development of different flavor characteristics. The temperature at which you ferment as a winemaker can oftentimes be one of your major controls, especially when you're not adding adjuncts or additions, since we are more along those lines of natural winemaking. And yeah, you get to taste the vineyard, which I really love. So Tom's super right that chalkiness or that calcium-rich nature is in there. And I always get from this vineyard a tiny bit of strawberry and some watermelon too, but not sweet, almost like an agua fresca, no sugar added at all. It's really refreshing.
This might be a good time to see if anybody has any questions so far, just on like the rosé or anything they're interested or in any of the stuff we've kind of gone over so far.
Does everyone like it?
Wait, what do we got here from Kristen? What did it say?
You have 1 year to sell rosé. Is it? Yeah. Do you ever sell for rosé higher in the summer? The spring and the summer are the time to sell your rosé for sure. And it's a wine that is produced year after year, right? A style of wine. And so having the rosé of just that previous year within the coming year is really important in the market. It's strange because we like to hold on to other wines and age other wines too. But rosé, for the most part in the U.S. market, is a drink quick.
Yeah. So somebody put the question about the strawberry burrata, which was the recipe we shared for this. And we chose that recipe because it is meant to go with rosé. It'll be a perfect accompaniment for that. And, also something that you can get from the spring, is good fresh strawberries.
Someone had asked how we select our, and I think they mean vineyard sites, not just winery site. That's a really good question. We spend a lot of time sleuthing for some of the varieties that we love, because Tom and I don't necessarily work with just all the traditional grape varieties out there. So a lot of research, a lot of driving around, a lot of asking questions, a fair amount of buying bottles of wine and trying to figure out where they're made and who makes them and which vineyards they're at. And then specifically, it's all about partnership. It's about finding the awesome farmers and vineyard owners that really are friends of yours, that you believe in and they believe in you, and that you have this incredible bond over a joint goal of making something delicious together, and of working together through thick and thin. There's years when it's easy to grow. There's years when it's really hard to grow. And so we need to be there for each other. And so it's just like another business partnership, with finding people you like to work with that have the same mentality and same outlook as you. And that sustainability factor has become really, really huge for us. When we first moved here, the movement was burgeoning, but we have guaranteed ourselves we are a herbicide-free winery. And all of our vineyards are either transitioning to organic at this time, organic, biodynamic, or regenerative. So good for the earth, because we need to leave this world a better place than we left it, or at least need to try. And farming is a huge part of that. So.
Do we have any other questions on rosé so far, or?
We have one person that said they like it because they don't normally drink rosé, which is awesome. I love that. Someone had also asked directly about the 2020 vintage and smoke. I don't know if everybody heard, but the West Coast was on fire last year in a major way. And so we had fires right before harvest. So yeah, we have some vineyards that are really affected by smoke, and others that are not so much. And Tom and I had to work really hard in the cellar in order to mitigate that flavor turning up in the wines in a major way. But at the same time, that's part of our job. We are trained to do this. We have a community around us that has been working against wildfires and against smoke taint for a number of years. The Southern Hemisphere, especially Australia, is really affected. So we're really lucky that we have a fair amount of resources to work with in order to be able to try to make wines that still taste delicious, even in terrible circumstances. I mean, the smoke here was apocalyptic. It was pretty incredible last year. So, but we're really happy. The 2020 wines that are just about to release, the spring wines, they're all pretty delicious. And I'm really, really pleased with how we navigated that situation. And it won't be the last time, and it certainly hasn't been the first. So something that is a good thing to talk about, I think, with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and on this, specifically on the Gamay Rosé for 2020, that was one of our sites that was fortunately not affected by smoke. So the 2020 Rosé is, as being one of our first releases of the wine, is starting off on a very good note. We were extremely happy with the way the 2020 wine came out, and we've just released that actually about less than maybe a week ago.
Someone had asked what temperature they recommend for this. I like it ice cold. I like it super, super chilly, but I also think that's up to personal choice. The warmer a rosé gets, a little bit more fruity and a little bit more textured it gets. Tom and I are also not so snobby that you can't drink this on ice or with sparkling water if you want to. I know that sounds absolutely blasphemous coming from a winemaker, but I really love a rosé spritz in the summertime. I think it's absolutely delicious, and this wine makes a great rosé spritz too.
It does. Very, very poolside friendly.
Someone had asked about the optimal aging of Gamay Rosé. This wine actually, because of its acidity, will last for a really long time. We're still opening some from our first vintage, which is 2013, our first commercial vintage of the Gamay Rosé, and they've held up beautifully. But of course, with more time, you get a little bit more honeyed notes. The wines get a little bit oxidized too, so a little bit deeper tones. So it's all about stylistically what you're looking for. There are some rosés in the world that are meant to age for 20 years. Some of the most famous, that come out of Provence. You don't see them that often. They're a little bit expensive, but certainly that's another style of winemaking too.
Mm-hmm. Somebody had asked a question about Walla Walla, and no, we have not sourced any grapes from Walla Walla in the past. However, this year, the greater Walla Walla area includes a sub-appellation called the Rocks, which is on the Oregon side of Walla Walla, and is at higher elevation and in this very rocks driven soil in the foothills of the Blue Mountains. And we will be getting a little bit of Syrah from there this year as part of one of our projects that we work on in the winery, that we're excited to, it'll be kind of our big experiment for the year.
Someone had asked about the two styles of rosé winemaking, the direct press versus the saignée. The saignée method, when you're making it as a red wine, but then pulling it off the skins, makes a richer rosé. So that's going to be more textured, a little bit darker in color mostly also. And it drinks more like a really light red wine for the most part. When you make it as direct press, it drinks more like a white wine. So we tend to style our rosés more after white wines than reds. But of course, that's up to personal choice from the winemaker. And always a really good sort of ask when you're going to buy rosé, when you find out which style you enjoy in the world, it's an easy question to ask the person you're buying wine from, because that information is provided to them no matter what. So I know a lot of people that are in the saignée camp, like no matter what, that's what they like. And that's what they ask for all the time. And other people then in the other camp. So it's a nice little tool for your back pocket when you're buying wine.
Somebody asked about the farming too. I think his name was Seth. Seth, almost all of our vineyards are organic or biodynamic farming principles. We do have a couple of old vine sites that they were own rooted, which means they don't have the rootstock that protects them from the root louse called phylloxera. So those particular vineyards we can't fully organically farm, but the seasonal preparations and treatments on the leaves through and the fruit through the year are organic compounds. We are transitioning a few vineyards too, including the Gamay Rosé vineyard, which is in its second year of transition now. But we are 100% herbicide free, so there is no Roundup or Crossbow or any of the systemic herbicides used on our vineyards.
I think Seth had also asked what the business case is for an organic vineyard. I truly believe that organic farming is the minimum requirement that our customers want from us. I know that I personally buy at a minimum organic foods at the grocery store. And we are in a price category and a style of wine where our clientele wants to know that we are not adding anything to their wines that could possibly hurt them or the earth. So the business case is about purchasing, right? It's about making sure that the client feels completely comfortable and is aligned with what you believe in too. So that's personally my business case for it. I think it's just right. And I think it is the bare minimum too.
Yeah, to further that, organic farming, by doing things this way, it forces you to be more thoughtful about how you farm in the vineyards and to be more proactive instead of reactive on your decision making, because there isn't as many reactive solutions that you can kind of run back to with organic compounds. So it means staying ahead of it, and it's a lot higher touch, which the next best business argument to me is just the quality is better of the fruit. That's not to say that there isn't traditionally farmed grapes that have made some of the most famous wines in the world, but we have found that the wines that we love the most and that we care about have had principles of a minimum of organic farming, and that I believe is just the attention to detail and thought process that goes into the vineyard is adds a lot of value.
Yeah, I mean, preventative health is what's best for us as humans, and it's best for our vineyards too. So,
All right, should before we anything else before we move on to the granny?
you know what? Mary Ray had said maybe that Jen and John had a few questions that had been sent in early, so we could do those now, or we could taste granite, or whatever
Yeah.
you want. Yeah, you want to do them now, Jen and John?
Well, there
We-
a lot of
yeah.
them we already touched on.
Cool.
Sorry, Tom.
Oh, I was gonna say we could do or split them up or
well,
whatever.
A lot of them you already touched on, talking about the business case for organic grapes and other challenges that are specific to our region with the fires and so forth. But a couple that you didn't touch on were, do you ever ask for volunteers during crush or bottling? I live in Seattle, but can drive down. I thought that was.
We certainly do. COVID made it hard though this past year to have people. It was, not only did we have, the nutsos fires, but we also had a crazy year of COVID and having to create pods to work in. If anyone had gotten sick at our winery, we would have been told to stop producing wine by the state, and we would have had to walk out on our grapes, which would have been really hard this year. So we had a super tight knit mini pod of people that work, the smallest group we've ever had. But I imagine as the world opens back up that we can invite you to come help grape sort with us again. It's one of my favorite things. People being able to see the exact clusters that they'll be able to drink a year later. It's awesome. So I can't wait for that moment that you can come down from Seattle and come help us sort grapes again.
So maybe we should move on to the next wine and then loop back to any questions we don't get to at that point.
For sure. So we're kind of moved. We're basically tasting wines from our two furthest apart vineyards. We are kind of right in the middle of them. So the Granite is from Southern Oregon in the Applegate Valley, and the Applegate Valley is located. It's a part of the Rogue Appellation, but it's in between the Rogue Valley and the Pacific Ocean. And it's a bit higher elevation than the Rogue Valley. This vineyard sits at about 1,700 feet high. And it gets a bit more moisture and it's a bit cooler than most of Southern Oregon Rogue, which has actually climate that's more akin to California. And so we really loved a couple of wines that we tried from this area about 10 years ago that came from Herb Quaddy's Mays Vineyard, which is named after his daughter. And so we kind of made it like we were doing with the Syrah from the rocks this year. We just kind of took a stab at saying, hey, we love Cabernet Franc from the Loire, and he had these Loire clones of Cabernet Franc, and they are grown on Oregon pink granite, which is a very unique soil series. And he was also doing organic farming, so it kind of hit all our boxes. And so we have been really in love with this Cabernet Franc that we've been making from Mays Vineyard since 2012. And this is our newest vintage of it from, I think, one of the most fantastic vintages in our careers in Oregon. So the climate was just really kind of did well for us that year. It was warm, but not too warm. There was some moisture, but it wasn't too wet. It wasn't too dry. And then we had this very nice long kind of, dry, cool period during late September and early October that was just really ideal for making the picking decision when it was just right. And
Mother Nature loved us some easy ones in 2019. Yeah. It was great. So Cab Franc wise, though, I think a lot of people maybe are more familiar with the Bordeaux iteration of Cab Franc, which is, of course, one of the main blending grapes in Bordeaux style wines, which you see coming out of course, Napa, most famously, but also Western France. And they tend to be really structured and big, and people tend to use a lot of new oak with those styles of wine. The Loire style, which Tom had mentioned, and the Loire is also in Western France, but a little further inland. It's at where the Loire River turns left towards the Atlantic Ocean. And those clones tend to be a little bit more acid driven and brighter, a little bit dustier and less rich and fruit forward, but also really interesting. Blue fruited for sure, but almost these like dry fall leaves that are really good, a little bit spicy also. And we do all of our Cab Franc in neutral French oak. We don't do new oak on this at all. So really allowing for the textures and the flavors of the vineyard itself to shine through without playing around with adding any oak influence through using new barrels. You back, Tom? I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Is your phone dying?
Yeah, my phone. I needed to get it plugged in.
Okay, no worries.
All right. So on the Granite wine, the fermentations for this are really kind of the important step for us that really kind of changed the dynamic of it. We used to do a fermentation, our fermentations for Cabernet Franc in these kind of small plastic bins, but we started doing some of them in concrete a few years ago, which I think really brought another element of the mineral characteristic to this wine that helps it with its aging profile and has kind of makes it a little bit smoother. And the great thing with Cabernet Franc is even though it's part of the Cabernet family and it's going to have has a bit of richness, it also has some of these kind of characteristics that we like of some of the wines from like Burgundy and other parts of northern France where they're just like, they have kind of an ethereal elegance to them. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about this wine.
Somebody had asked in the questions about naturally occurring yeasts, and yes, we use indigenous and naturally occurring yeasts for all of our wines. We specifically actually select a pied de cuve, which means a foot of the cellar. So for each vineyard, we do a yeast selection that's specific to each site. The reason that we personally don't use conventional yeast, and if anyone is a bread baker here, they know how powerful yeast is, right? Conventional yeast has a really good, strong hold on making sure things ferment really well and really fast. And it's only one type of yeast. Using a natural yeast, even though we selection the yeast we're going to use from the vineyard and we're using our naturally occurring yeast in the vineyard, using indigenous yeast is actually a layering of hundreds of thousands of different yeast strains within the ferment itself. And because you're not using one like big commercial yeast and it's, you know, just one strain, all those other little yeasts that are working are fighting it out and are creating all these different layers and intrigue within the wine. And so what I really think is that we can get consistency in terms of site. So each site on earth tastes really individual. So that's the terroir aspect. And Tom's and my winemaking style, that's another aspect that you can taste as consistency within the wine. And then the fluctuation that you get is from the vintage. So whether it was a cool year or a warm year or long growing season or short growing season, that is actually for me what the beauty in wine is that you can still have consistency with having fluctuation and differences at the same time. And you can sort of read those together. It's like a different story for every year. And those yeasts that are in our winery and that are on those vineyards tend to be really consistent from vintage to vintage. And so you're getting a little bit more of that footprint from that consistency there too. It's a really good question. It's a little difficult to explain. Natural winemaking, which is what we do, can be a little bit more risky, but for us, the reward is really great. It actually means that we have to be really vigilant because maybe a not so great natural yeast strain will take off in the wines, and we'll have to do a temperature change or really, really watch the ferment to make sure that we're co-sealing on the best yeasts in that moment, not the bad yeasts in that moment. So it makes our job more difficult, but we think it's worth it at the end. Oh, what some other ones? Someone had asked about the design on the rosé bottle. I'm a geography major. Well, one of my 3 majors is geography, and it's actually a map of Département 63 in France. It's the Auvergne. And so it's a rendition of that area. And each of the village wines, if you take a look on our website, they each have geographical references on their on the labels. I love maps. I actually don't know anyone that doesn't love maps. So maps are pretty cool. I'm going to read off the questions because I think Tom might be having a hard time with connecting.
No, I'm okay.
Oh, you're good now. Cool. Another one is, can you talk more about how you experiment with new wines?
I wanted to answer, there was a question about the yeast, and I remember somebody actually asked about Brettanomyces in the pre-questions. And so you can see right here, this is the very little starts of the season here. I know, look how cool they are. So those little leaves right there, those little leaves have little yeast molecules, and Brettanomyces is a type of Brett. And so like type of yeast, sorry, like the Saccharomyces yeast, the Brettanomyces yeast lives right here in parts of the foliage of the plant. And so when we're trying to coax the natural yeasts that live symbiotically with the vineyard, that's that whole process Kate mentioned of the Pied de Cuve. So we're hoping that we build the population up from the yeast that like to live with these grapes, so that we can get a character that is from this vineyard. And we're trying to downplay the fact that the environmental factors that would help the Brettanomyces yeast population build.
Hey, Tom, can you zoom in again? I want to show everybody the leaves, but also where the flowers are going to be.
Yeah, right there.
Cool. So it looks like if you get really close in there, there's that bud on the end of it there. And it kind of almost looks like a grape cluster right now, but it's not. It's actually going to flower first, and then it's going to be grapes. And the shoot that you see is going to grow to probably be around 7 or 8 feet over the course of its lifetime. You have to cut it down a few times in order to get to really focus on the quality of the grape and not just producing more leaves and more shoots.
But so like this one will be one that'll go, and
that one will,
so we'll be doing what we're saying, the shoot thinning. See, we want to select the bigger of the two, or the better of the two. So like this one will be one that'll be thinned and it'll come off. And then you're looking in here and you go, okay, here's the primary and the secondary. Secondary comes off. And this is the way we prepare this vine to produce the optimal grape for the year.
Because you want the grapevine to focus on reproduction, not on growth. And when it focuses on reproduction, that means it's focusing on making those grapes delicious instead of focusing on growing its leaves and reaching up to the sky. Some of the other questions is, have any of our wine fermentations ever gotten stuck? We certainly have some wine fermentations that get stuck. When we were first doing this, and what was really funny is that Oregon gets pretty chilly in the wintertime, not like Midwestern cold, but cold enough that the activity in the barrels starts to really slow down. Because if you imagine fermentation is active yeast, or you have malolactic, so there's a lot of stuff that actually needs a nice warm temperature in order to keep going. So the first few years we did this by ourselves, we'd watch our fermentations shut off in November, December, and then we'd freak out. We're like, oh my goodness, our wine's gonna stay sweet or not go through mellow. But what's really cool is the circadian rhythm of the earth and the way that things heat back up in the springtime. Those yeasts come back to life, and for the most part, finish your wines. It just takes a lot of patience. It's something that I've really learned. Life just takes a fair amount of patience. Some things that have gotten stuck and not want to go through, Tom and I actually let the residual sugar stay. And that way we can blend it with some drier barrels. Sometimes the wine just wants to be what it wants to be. And sometimes a little sweetness in there, blended with some barrels that are dry, creates something absolutely beautiful. We have to be careful in that instance that we don't just stick that in a bottle and send it to you. We actually have to filter out any of the yeast that would put that sugar back into fermentation. Because, for instance, if you put that bottle right above your stove in your kitchen and got real hot, then that cork would pop up because the yeast would start to create CO2 again. We've had some really, really stuck ferments that, after a long time, we're like, okay, maybe we should introduce a packaged yeast in order to redo that. We did that a few times in the beginning, but it's something we do less and less. For the most part, it's really strenuous on the wine in order to try that, to get them to get going again. And it oftentimes is really, really hard. And so allowing it to sort of be what it wants to be works a little bit better for us. I hope that answers that question. The yeast comes in right on the skins of the grapes. So that was the question. Does it come on the leaves? Yes, it's on the leaves, but it's also on the grapes itself. And so when we're doing that pied de cuve, we're actually starting a tiny little ferment for each vineyard separately. The Cabernet Franc is 100% Cabernet Franc. It is. Mm-hmm. And how many shoots do you leave per vine? This is a very good question. I'll let Tom answer that, especially since it's really starting to change with climate change.
Yeah, so this is a little dependent on how the spacing is at your vineyard. So the further apart the spacing is on the plant, the more buds that you'll let go, because the plant has basically, if you think about, if it's 5 feet from the next plant, then it has a certain amount of radius to pull nutrients from, so it can support more buds and more load, like more crop load on that particular plant. The closer the plant is to another plant, that yield goes down, and the soils of the nutrition and water and nutrients available to feed that particular plant reduces. So you have to scale down the amount of buds that you allow for growing on that particular plant. So you see a wide variety of this in kind of the old Oregon and many parts of the Northwest. If you think about it, like tractors were a lot wider, equipment was a lot clunkier, it was just more complicated. So you tended to see these really big wide rows, like 12 feet wide, 8-9 feet between the plants.
Avenues.
Yeah, it's really big vines that had tons of shoots on them. So they might leave 12, or so buds for shoots on the plant. And whereas what we were just looking at, we'll end up leaving somewhere between 4 and 6 on each of these plants, because we're planting these with 6 to 7 feet of separation between the vines, and between each row, I'm saying, and then between each plant, only 3 feet or 4 feet.
When it comes to farming, so you saw those shoots coming up. What's so cool is once the harvest is done in the fall and the vines start to shut down, we will select one of those 6 on either side to be the main cane for next year, and to be the cane that the shoots come up through again. And so in the past, what people normally do is they do one main cane, and then they do a secondary cane that could be next year's cane too. What's really interesting is that I don't know if anyone's been reading or following along, but France and Europe actually experienced some giant frosts in the past month. So the French grape harvest, in some areas, they lost 80% of their crop. So France is going to have a really tough year in a lot of areas. So instead of just leaving one cane on one side and one possible cane on another, they're starting to leave more canes over the winter time, in order that if the frost ruins all their baby shoots, that they can maybe have enough shoots in order to have enough grapes for harvest. So climate change is really changing the way that harvest is done, and also that farming is done too.
So, that discussion point about Kate was saying, I literally just saw a little photo with a caption today from a grower in Burgundy that had lost about 70% of his shoots, his primary buds, to the frost a few weeks ago, and then it had warmed up, and he was putting in some photos up, and he was like, "Oh, look what we have." He's like the miraculous. He was saying the miraculous kind of force to want to live, and the plant was pushing secondary and tertiary canes and buds through. So he thinks that maybe now with the secondaries and the tertiaries, he will be able to recoup some of what was lost off of the primary fruiting cane.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't go too long into October and November and the weather gets crappy again. So we're like screwed on all sides with farming, but it's okay.
All right. Questions that came up on I could maybe they repeat them, because I just only see them for a second.
Yeah, I can read them for you, no problem. So how did you and I decide to pursue a career in winemaking? I like wine. Tom had written that the business plan at WashU at Olin, and he and I were living in St. Louis at the time. And it's actually a pretty funny story and a sad story at the same time, but it's life. The economy crashed in 2008, and Tom was thinking about going into investment banking and had received a few job offers in New York City. And I was an event planner at the time. And we looked around and we realized that both of our career choices were going to be nil for at least until the economy recovered. And we had saved a little money, and my family was in France. And so we decided that we would take a year and a half and move over there. And if we really hated winemaking, we had some friends that were friends of the family that were winemakers, and they had agreed to sort of let us figure it out with them. And if we hated it, then it would be okay. We could come back to the States and we could try to find other jobs, and we would make it, and we were young, it would be okay. But if we really loved it, then maybe it would be something else for us. And I mean, it's 2021, I think. So we're still doing it. Uh-huh. And I'm really thankful I am. This is the most interdisciplinary job I could ever imagine on earth. You know, we get to do marketing, we get to do client outreach, we get to do farming, we get to do science, we get to do geology. It's really absolutely incredible. Never a dull moment. We get to deal with Mother Nature, and she's incredible. So other questions? What's your favorite wine to make, Tom? And what's your favorite wine that someone else makes?
Ooh,
it's really hard. It's like picking your favorite child.
Yeah, I mean,
you only have one. So.
I would say I have like a little bit of, well, I wouldn't. It's not that it's my favorite wine to make, but the gamets always kind of are really intriguing to me, because it doesn't have a history here, and we get to kind of, I guess, trailblaze that a little bit. And I am just like really want to like push the level of quality and capacity of that grape. I feel like I know that we can make really fantastic Pinot Noir, and our region has demonstrated that. So there's something about like watching how much I think better the wines we've made have gotten over the years, and just what we've learned. And so I really enjoy making those wines. But you know, there's something interesting about all of them, or we wouldn't really do that.
For sure, they surprise us every year, right? So I think I'm with you on that. The Gamay really speaks to my heart. I love to drink it. I love to drink other people's Gamays. I love to drink our Gamay. It's like a very soul enriching wine for me. It hits the spot every time, no matter what. But at the same time, we get to experiment so much. You know, Tom and I make over 30 wines, from orange wine to rosé to sparkling wines to Nebbiolo. I mean, it's absolutely crazy the amount that we make, and it's because those experiments and really discovery is something that is so fascinating to the two of us. And I think that the world has gotten so much closer in terms of our access to different styles of wines that I love trying our wines and then trying someone else's interpretation of the same variety from anywhere else. It's a really great thing to do. There's so much out there. There's so much to learn too, every day. And then of course champagne. I would drink champagne. Who wouldn't? My dad, I guess my dad doesn't like champagne. We don't talk about it. Do you sometimes grow something else between the rows of grapes? This isn't always. Yes. Conventional farming has sometimes completely removed what we call cover crop or between row plantings. But more and more so, we get to choose what we plant between the rows. And that's something that you rotate also based on what nutrients you are needing to insert into the earth or what you're looking to take away from the grapes in terms of vigor. So there's some really popular ones in Oregon, but the sky's the limit in terms of what you can plant. Red clover is really popular. Mustard is also really popular. I don't know what we have planted at Casson this year. Do you know when you were down there? You're muted.
There is mustard and clover in between the lines. There, a lot of the reason that some of these things are chosen is because they're good at combating the weeds, and they don't interfere with the nutrition of the grapevine, because once they die out, you know, in the drier part of the season, they put a lot of energy back in the soils. But in the early part of the season, when it's moist, there is a competition with not letting, you know, invasive weeds that can, you know, attach to root structure and take energy from them. The one that's most notorious here in Oregon is thistle.
And so it's absolutely beautiful. You get to see everybody's choices of what they want to grow for the year. There's nothing prettier than a vineyard with really good cover crop. So
yeah, it's so cool. This time of year is so pretty in the vineyards.
Yeah, and probably about 3 weeks, you'll just see fields of red clover with vines just in lines through them. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
So there was a question I saw, somebody had asked something about Burgundian Pinot Noir.
Hold on. I don't see Burgundy in here. I do see some more in the,
We see it.
Yeah, the question was, why are Burgundian Pinot Noirs
there we
so
go.
different from American Pinot Noirs?
And we should probably make it our last question.
We're getting close to the end here.
Okay.
What happened?
Bye, Tom. Okay, I can do this.
Take it away.
Here I am. Well, you know what? What's really interesting is the age of the vines and also the age of the soils. And also the aspect and just the style of winemaking, and also just what the soils are comprised of. So Burgundy, the soils tend to be more sedimentary. And then if you go to the Chablisian area, they're very, very calcium rich. And you have vines that have been planted there and farmed there for hundreds and hundreds of years with lots and lots of practice. And also sort of the style of what the French like their wines to taste like. So there's Burgundy for you. And then fast forward to America, we are a much younger growing region. Our soils are very, very rich and very vigorous. If you think about Oregon in terms of Pinot Noir, we grow mostly on volcanic soil. We do have some soils that were brought from the Missoula flood, so that it's called the Laurelwood series, and then on some marine sedimentary. So very, very different soils. If you think about California Pinot Noirs, a much hotter region. So much hotter than Burgundy. So those wines are going to be richer and bigger also. And then stylistically, in the US, we have tended as a population to like bigger and richer wines. And so you have to think about winemakers oftentimes style their winemaking towards what people want to drink. I think that we're actually tending further away from that and going more towards nuance and a little bit more acid driven and a little bit lighter and brighter wines. And so I think that the landscape of what you taste in Pinot Noir has changed. And you see that more so with Oregonian wines too. I think that they are even a little bit more restrained than California wines, closer to Burgundy. And they're completely different regions. And I think for a long time, that Oregon actually attached themselves to the idea of Burgundy because it was a marketing concept that people could grasp. That you could say that, oh, we make wines like the French do in Burgundy, and people are like, oh, I totally get it. High quality, really delicious. But we're seeing a sort of a departure in terms of those marketing messages as American wines are really establishing themselves as a force internationally, and especially Oregon wines.
So we have time actually for a few more questions.
Oh, sweet. I can keep doing it. I don't know if Tom's ever coming back, you guys.
I'm back.
Oh, he's
Oh,
back.
wait, we
I
hear
hear
him
him.
back.
Sorry.
There,
I guess
there he is. What did you do?
I was basically talking to myself for about 30 seconds.
Oh, it's totally fine. So I tried to answer the Burgundy question. I think I did it. So
All right.
next up is when you lease a vineyard site, how much control do you have over the farming choices?
Well, and that is a great question because that can vary very differently from vineyard to vineyard. So for instance, the vineyard that I'm at today, the Casson Vineyard, one of the reasons it was so exciting for us to be able to lease the whole vineyard was it gave us pretty much complete control over all the decision making that happens on the vineyard. That is uncommon. And so we have wanted to have something like that for many years because it gives us the input decisions. We can work very closely with the folks who help us in the vineyard with meeting our goals, and whatever those decisions we make, we'll have to live with. Whereas a lot of vineyard farmers, even when they're leasing some of the acres, they kind of set a lot of controls on it because they're trying to protect the value.
But I also think that this then ties back to how do you pick your farming partners in your vineyard?
Yes.
Is that you end up choosing the people that want to work with you, not the people that are just making their own decisions, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that sort of ties into that first question also, but really exciting that we then get to make the decisions ourselves on this new vineyard rather than even just talking to anybody about it. So huge step in our careers.
Yeah, in fact, we just deal directly with the vineyard crew. We do not deal with the ownership, and that is the difference, I would say, between most of our other lease arrangements, where we do a collaborative approach where it's the owners and us and the vineyard manager or the vineyard management team, and where we'll start to have conversations, and usually we are able to have a pretty good amount of input into it. But if we're only leasing a part of the vineyard, so say maybe like a quarter of it or a third of it, there is practical stuff that comes into play, and the vineyard owner might be like, well, we can't do it that differently because we're already doing it like this everywhere else. And so yes, we are making decisions to work with vineyards that are mostly how we would make them ourselves, but there are subtle differences that maybe if it was completely left up to us, we would make a slightly different decision.
So other questions on here is, when do we know when to drink a wine or wait for it to age more? I personally feel that there's never the wrong time to open a bottle of wine. Like, go for it. You want to drink it, just do it. We specifically as winemakers try to release our wines when we think they're ready for you to drink, or you can age them if you want to. And so that choice is then left in your hands as to how you want to do it. I also really love to sometimes buy more than one bottle of something so that I could try one now and know if I wanted to maybe wait on it a little bit more, if I was curious. But there's no real rules when it comes to that. I think that this is one of the things Tom and I really look to get away from, is that I think there's been so much structure and so much like mystery, like, when do I open it? What am I supposed to do? What is it supposed to taste like? Like, all of that does not matter. It's like, do whatever you want, whatever feels good to you, just do it. And if you want to ask questions of like what we would recommend, for instance, that Pinot, I think it tastes incredible now, but I also know it's going to taste incredible in 5 years.
Yeah, and there's a bit of like a lot of this is personal preference of what's kind of like, but some kind of like general thoughts and guidelines is like the wines are typically going to be a little fruitier when they're younger, and they get a little bit more savory and softer as they get older. And so those are just kind of things that you have to decide, what do I like in my wines? Like I used to like think that chasing old wines was like, oh, there's some like greatness about it, like fine old wines, and sometimes there is, but like now I've been finding that I usually like, especially with a lot of white wine, prefer it when it's considerably younger than I do when it's older. As you know, it's because it just starts to lose some of these kind of fruit characteristics that I enjoy in the wines. That's my personal preference. I have friends that I hang out with, and I know Kate likes some oxidative characteristics of wines,
Mhm.
and they prefer that. And it's just what you like yourself.
Yeah, everybody's different, and I think that the only way to discover that is to try things, right, and to sometimes branch out, and but also it's really nice to drink your old favorites too. But that's kind of what makes wine so great, is there's something different for every single day and every single mood and every time, and that we get to sort of mix and match those. It's sort of really a sort of a fun game almost. There's a few more questions maybe that we need to get to before it's time up, I think.
Mhm.
Someone had asked about an apiary, and apiaries are pretty common on vineyards these days in Oregon. So yes, we do love apiaries. Bees are the best. Someone wanted to ask about the difference between our Gamay Noirs, and we make quite a few. We make one that's a Nouveau, so that's the first wine of the season. It's from grape to bottle in 8 weeks. We make a spring carbonic style one called Les Petits Fers that's like fun and bright and crunchy and really great for this time of year. And then we make some single vineyard designates that are really a sense of place, almost the same way that you see with Pinot, really delving down into that exact vineyard at that exact moment in time, and looking at our sites through the lens of Gamay as a variety. And that's something that Tom and I are really passionate about.
So I think Jen and John have a couple more questions for us.
Yeah, I thought the one particularly good question was, since we have it, if you could just speak to the Pinot Noir just to hear your thoughts
Yes,
and
of
describe it
course.
before.
Yeah, so this so this is actually great timing because we're talking about the when to drink wines. And so the Pinot Noir deux comes from our oldest Pinot Noir planting at the Eola Springs Vineyard, which is in the Eola Amity Hills and near the town of Salem, Oregon. And this vineyard was planted, the original block of Pinot Noir was planted in 1972, which Kate and I have that block, and we have a few of the other old blocks. And this is not only our oldest vines, so very charactered and very like have a specific sense of place, but also the oldest block of Pinot Noir in the Eola Amity Hills. And so that's been a pretty exciting thing for us. And this was our very first vineyard that we started with in 2010. So we have a lot of history with this vineyard. And so and this wine, we make several different fermentations, and it is always this just like really kind of saline kind of, it's got a briny characteristic.
Well, it's planted where the ocean used to be, and when you walk through the vineyard, there's marine fossils everywhere.
Yeah, heliotropes and mollusks and old oyster beds, and so this is this is a definition of, like, for us, a wine that like we definitely see a progression as it ages, and at least that it becomes more like interesting and intriguing. Where in the aging cycle, like, where you open it is really a great decision for you. But we just released the wine because we think it's starting to drink really interestingly. It will continue that way for many years to come. We encourage people, if they open theirs now and they like it, get a few bottles and definitely hold a few for a time. If you want to hold the one you have now, definitely makes sense too. But this is like one of those wines that Kate and I will like continually look and check back with, from time to time, because we think it'll really stand the test of time.
Yeah, the absolutely beautiful place in the world. So
there was a question here on best way for out-of-staters to purchase the wine.
Website. Yeah, so we have a fully capable e-commerce website, divisionwineco.com.
Capable one. Sorry.
Yes. Well, some of them kind of suck, like
Some
some of them it's like clunky
Yeah.
and you have to get around. It's hard to get in and out of them. And I feel like ours it works pretty well. And we have a great team member who helps us stay on top of everything with it. She's awesome. Name's Liz. You will deal with her if you order any wines online. And then
Tom put a code together for everybody to get a discount.
Yeah.
More wine.
Yes. So anybody who would like to get more wine, you can use WashU. I think it's WashU 2021 as the code, and you'll get 15% off, and the code's good for the next 3 months.
Thank you. That's
Thank you.
great. Okay, I think this has been fantastic. We really appreciate all of your time and expertise. The wines are just delicious, and it was actually extra magical to get that virtual tour of the vineyard. So
Yeah, sorry I fell off for a little bit there.
It's okay. We got to see the little clusters. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
It was worth it.
Totally
It's worth it to see the beautiful spring Oregon weather.
Yeah, sunny day.
Sunny day. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. We've enjoyed spending the past hour with you, and for everyone, if you have any other suggestions for alumni and parent speakers as fabulous as these two, please let us know. Or if you actually would like to be featured at a WashU event yourself, you can email Mary Ray, maryray.perry. Maybe we can put that in the chat as well. And a little plug here, if you're an undergraduate alum or a parent of a current WashU student, we'd love your help. What's that? Sorry.
That's not correct.
We'd love your help assisting us in your local community with undergraduate admissions efforts through the Alumni and Parents Admissions Program, APAP. APAP volunteers all over the world help to recruit, interview, enroll, and welcome students and their families to WashU. You can reach out to me if you're local to Portland, or if you'd like more information on in your local community, you can go to, I'm reading off this thing, it's kind of hard. You can visit apap.worcester.edu to sign up. John and I have been involved with APAP for, I don't know, like 20 years now,
At least, yeah.
a very long time. And we've found it to be a wonderful way to stay connected with other local WashU alumni and families, and also at the same time give back to WashU. And additionally, we encourage you to visit the virtual connection page on our website to learn about other ways to connect with WashU alumni, students, and faculty. The link will be in our chat, and the page is updated regularly. Go ahead, John.
I just had one comment. So being local, I've really enjoyed following them on social media. I know, Mary Ray, you did put up the Instagram, but I think it was incorrect. You put Division Wines, which is actually a great retail wine shop on Division Street, but their Division Wine Co. is their Instagram handle, which is very important. So being able to follow, Tom used to travel, I think, around the country promoting your wines to restaurants.
Kate too, yeah, we're both around. She's True Gamine and I'm Wine Stash.
Yeah. Right. And then there's the Division Winemaking Company, which you can find on Facebook. And it's a real pleasure to follow what's going on with their winemaking and just would encourage everybody who's interested to follow.
And you'll get to follow along as we build out the new winery space. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, I'll put a time lapse up there eventually for everybody to see, but we just got the keys last week. So.
Whoa. It's fantastic. Congratulations with that. We look forward to following it. And thank you so much for doing this. You both are awesome.
Thank you.
Bye to everybody and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Thank you so much, John Jen.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Good to see you.